You're watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV from Toronto, Ontario. I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. Today, a conversation with Imam Habeeb Ali, a Muslim chaplain, about what it's like for Muslims in prison. But first, some news headlines. 14 Indigenous people arrested after encounter with RCMP. We Charity allegedly misled donors in Adopt a Village program. 46 Canadian universities and colleges commit to fight anti-Black racism. Netherlands risks rising sea levels by over 6 feet. And Sikhs in India invite Muslims to pray in Gurdwara. And now the details. 14 Indigenous people belonging to the Wet'suwet'en and Haudenosaunee communities were arrested by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or the RCMP, for barricading the entrance to a service road in northern British Columbia yesterday. The RCMP says that the operation was a rescue effort to supply water to around 500 workers at coastal GasLink camps up north. This is the third time the RCMP have conflicted with Indigenous people on this road, the previous being in 2019 and 2020. Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs claim that the coastal GasLink pipe does not have permission to cross into their territory. The We Charity allegedly misled its supporters in the Adopt a Village program by pretending to build multiple schoolhouses, passing off an image of one building as many schoolhouses to the donors. Photo proofs collected by the CBC's Fit the State shows that multiple donors received pictures of the same schoolhouse. The findings follow a request submitted by NDP MP Charlie Angus earlier this year for the RCMP to investigate We Charity's finances. In a letter to the CBC, the We Charity says that the findings of the investigation are false. 46 Canadian universities and colleges signed a charter to fight against anti-Black racism in their institutions yesterday. Called the Scarborough Charter, the 22-page document aims to develop an action plan to promote Black inclusion on campus. The document came out of an advisory committee held at the University of Toronto last year to discuss the effects of anti-Black racism after the death of George Floyd in the United States. Signatories of the Charter committed to Black flourishing to foster equality, human dignity, and sustainability. Sea levels could rise by over 6 feet in the Netherlands by the end of this century, according to a report from the Dutch Meteorological Institute. The Climate Signal 21 report describes climate change scenarios for the country based on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's calculations from this summer. The Netherlands face more risks than any other nation in the region. A third of the country already lies below sea level, where about half of the population lives. The report came as world leaders discussed the effects of climate change and possible solutions to the climate crisis at the COP26 Glasgow summit. People have come together to provide Muslims with alternative praying areas after they were banned from entering mosques in multiple Indian cities. Sikhs in Gurugram opened their places of worship, or Gurdwaras, to Muslims and invited them to pray. Hartarith Singh, the Community Development Director of Hemkut Foundation, an organization that opened their Gurdwara to Muslims, says that he has already received several death threats aimed towards him and his family on Twitter. Since his post, countless have reported accounts of Hindu men also opening their homes for Muslims to pray safely. The effort comes as Hindu extremist mobs swarmed mosques during Friday prayers and chanted religious slogans. That's it for the news, and now our interview with Imam Habeeb Ali, a Muslim chaplain, about his work in the prisons. Welcome to the show, Imam Habeeb. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Dr. Catherine Bullock. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
It's nice for you to join us. Now, about Muslims in prison, they are about 6.6% of the population, but only 3% of the Canadian population. So that's a big discrepancy. And apparently there's been a 20% rise in Muslim prisoners. Can you tell us why that's happening?
Yeah, I could only assume that with the recent research being done with Muslim population in the prison system in Canada, done by others, it seems that some of the factors include conversion, rise in crime, as well as detained for immigration reasons. There has been, of course, an influx of immigrants in Canada, and some of them are sitting in prison because of immigration matters. By and large, the Muslim population in the prison system also rises according to ethnicity, because there's an overlayer between ethnicity and religion.
And does the prison system actually count conversion if they convert?
Well, because the Charter of Rights and Freedom guarantees your right to religion, so people do convert in prison, and Muslims do convert in prison. But it's not like we see compared to the States, where there's a huge influx of conversion. And of course, there are protocols and procedures that are put in place for conversion, so that it's not done in a very ad hoc or wild or as anyone pleases.
I think there's a segment of our community, the Muslim community, that might not even believe that Muslims are committing crime, because they want to think that, we're ideal people. So do you have any idea, I don't even know how to ask this question properly, but why is there a rise in Muslims committing crime?
Well, if Muslims are part of the demographics of those who faced systemic racism in Canada, so you will definitely correlate that with increase of Muslim presence in the prison system. And also, if you look into the fact that there has been some of the crimes that have been committed, acts of terrorism, extremism, and other forms of violence, there has been a situation where younger Muslims find themselves in gangs and other ways of feeling depressed and alienated in Canada, so they end up in the system.
Now, you mentioned systemic racism, and we know, I have heard stories about in the US, the guards would deny a Muslim prisoner the right to pray Jummah, or deliberately delay iftar if they're fasting during Ramadan. Are those things happening in Canadian prisons too?
We have seen in the news from time to time some of these issues come up in the prison system and Muslims, but where I work and where many of the Muslim chaplains work in the prison system, they do their best to ensure that, based upon the Charter of Rights and Freedom, that the Muslims get Jummah, the Muslims get halal meals, the Muslims get their religious accommodation reasonably expedited. And we have seen with the growth of Muslim chaplaincy in the prison system in Canada that less and less of these problems. But of course, we cannot necessarily say all of it has been covered. It's a work in progress.
You mentioned the rise in Muslim chaplains. I don't suppose you have any statistics about how many Muslim chaplains there are serving the prisoners?
I would average, based upon, recently I tried to do a Muslim chaplaincy webinar in the Islamic History Month in October, as well as Spiritual Week. And we saw about 25 Muslim chaplains in Canada from all backgrounds. And I could say maybe about maybe 15 and even more of them happens to work in the prison system. And I'm sure I don't have the correct figures, but compared to when we started 14 years ago, or when our very first Muslim chaplain, Ziaullah, in Halifax started about 20 years ago, or our own Yasin Dwyer started maybe about almost 17 years back. So there were very few Muslim chaplains in the system.
And why did you decide to go on and become a Muslim chaplain?
Well, I'm still trying to figure out that mystery, but maybe two reasons I could put it together is that I studied Islamic theology in India. I lived in Guyana. I migrated to Canada. An opportunity was presented to me to work as a chaplain in the very beginning of my arrival here in Canada. And I was hesitant and not knowing, of course, after 9/11, Muslims are hesitant anything to do with prisons. But when the opportunity was presented to me, I was advised by people like Abdul Hayy Patel and Hamid Slimi and others to take it up. And after a while, I decided to take it up. And I think it's because of my work over the years as an imam with the vulnerable. This sector is disenfranchised, hardly visited, and it was an opportunity for me to work in this sector and to give back to the community. So I've been doing this for the last 14 years.
Yes, well, I was going to ask you that. Do you think that the Muslim prisoners are the most neglected in our community?
Well, that the taboo and the barriers and the discrimination still are faced with anyone who has a criminal record re-entering into society. Our work as chaplaincy, social services, restorative justice, it's about reintegration. And we do have a number of success stories. My podcast, One Love Podcast, and my One Love Gala over the years, basically try to highlight some of those success stories. But by and large, families, disown their own, or communities do not want to harbor a person with a criminal record, etc. So those challenges still remain. But we do have a few good stories of people who reintegrate in Canada and even abroad, and have done very well.
So what would you like, we have to wrap it up in about a minute or so. So what would you like the community to know? What are the most pressing needs in prison or out of prison? What's your advice to us?
Maybe I could articulate with a story. There was a brother who is now out. He was a white supremacist. I would call him Aziz for now. And he accepted Islam on my hands, learned the Quran, learned to practice Islam, went through a lot of issues, including from his own Muslims. And he was fearful that his tattoo would be a problem when he enters the mosque, when he visits Muslims. But very, well-spoken, very articulate, come from a very depressed background. But now that he's outside, he says that he has been welcome at the mosque. His tattoo wasn't a problem. His being white wasn't a problem. And him learning the Quran and learning this Islamic studies has helped him to reintegrate. So there are such barriers that we find. And I want to thank all the imams and all the people out there in Canada, Muslim and non-Muslim, who have helped us in the reintegration process of Muslim inmates. It's a work in progress. And again, have an open mind, put resources for reintegration. And when you see someone enter the mosque with tattoos, don't judge them by, as we say, the book by the cover. Get to know them. They are human beings. They are Muslims, and they are there to make a contribution.
So you're advising us to be open-minded. If someone wants to be a volunteer, how would they?
There are continuous opportunities. With the pandemic, volunteers weren't allowed to go to the prison. But now things are opening up back, so volunteers are going back and are allowed. So if someone gets in touch with you or myself and they would like to volunteer, we could definitely show them the ropes and get them to volunteer. We have very few Muslim chaplains who are volunteers in the system. I would like to shout out to one of them who has been doing it for 20 years, Imam Shakur Muhammad. He goes to the provincial and the federal, and he has done an awesome job in being a volunteer. So it's possible.
Well, thanks very much for coming on the show and sharing your insights with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. And again, I would like to thank you and the awesome people there at the Muslim Network.
Thanks, brothers. You've been watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe and God bless.